Hello YouTube. So this is going to be my synthesis video. It's my second time trying to record it because video got kind of glitchy. But so we've been through the correspondence theory of truth, which is a transcendental, or not a transcendental theory of truth. It's a transcendent theory of truth that is rooted in the object. We have been through the coherence theory of truth, which is an immanent theory of truth rooted in the subject, right? So how to sublate these two terms? I prefer the term sublation to synthesis, but I use the word synthesis here because it's a little bit more recognizable. The term that Hegel actually uses is sublation. So how do we sublate these two terms? Well, instead of being transcendent or immanent, we make truth emergent. And instead of being subjective or objective, we make truth intersubjective. Right? So the theory of truth that I would advance is a version of the pragmatist theory of truth. And I would say that which is true is that which, when put into practice, bears fruit. Right? So this strikes a middle ground between these two theories of truth, right? And I'd say it is entirely self-bootstrapping. That which is true is that which, when put into practice, bears fruit. Or you could say that it works, right? Truth is that which works. So how does this theory of truth work, right? Well, take the proposition, I am living in a matrix, right? Is that statement true? Well, it seems to me that it's impossible for me to put that proposition into practice. There is no way for me to behave as if I live in a matrix. But I guess we could try and do something. We could do something like Neo does and try to jump across buildings and do all sorts of crazy feats like that. You know, just let go and jump off a building. Now, I guess that would be an attempt to put that proposition into practice. But it obviously doesn't work, right? You end up splattered on the ground. So therefore we can say, you know, I don't live in a matrix. So and we can say that with certainty, right? There is, because the statement I don't live in a matrix is not supposed to correspond to some state of affairs out there anymore, right? Therefore, I can be as certain as I like about the proposition, I am not living in a matrix, right? Because it has nothing to do with reality out there. There is no attempt to bring two things into a relation of equivalence. It's just an issue of how do we conduct our discourse, right? Now, one major upshot of taking this attitude towards truth is that it privileges, in a really powerful way, it privileges the practical over the theoretical. And I'm using those terms in their classic philosophical sense. I know that some people might get prickly about the use of the word theoretical in this way, given the whole, you know, theory of evolution conversation, etc. But in the classical sense of practical and theoretical, it privileges the practical over the theoretical. So why, 2 + 2 = 4? Why, how do I know that that's true? How do I demonstrate that? Well, if I were to try and go about it theoretically, right, it's really hard to do. How do you guarantee that necessarily within like a correspondence theory or something? How would you guarantee that 2 + 2 is always 4, right? How does it you might say something, you might do like Hume does and say, well, I see two, and therefore there's four. And the next time I see them, they also equal four, and so over time you just build up this expectation that it will always equal four. And it's not 100% certain, but whatever. Um, Whereas in a pragmatist conception, what what would it be to put into practice the belief that 2 plus 2 equals 5, right? What would the outcome of that be? Well, I'd probably go to jail for tax fraud. Um, I'd if I have a business, it'll probably collapse. like it doesn't work, right? It doesn't lead you someplace that that is functional, right? It's simply not a functional presupposition, if you like, or it's not a functional model or paradigm to implement in reality, in the world. Um, and it doesn't seem to me to need any more grounding than that. So in a certain way, this is an anti-foundationalist conception of truth, right? The point is not that we create some firm theoretical foundation that guarantees everything, right? The point is to say that that whole approach is bunk to begin with, right? Um, Instead, we say that that which is true is that which, when put into practice, works. Um, so the other thing, this is something that, and I do want to be completely honest, there are some strange sort of consequences that come with this, that some people might take as limitations. I actually think that I like these consequences. Um, First of all, truth stops being something that's inert, right? It's not something that's static anymore. This is what I mean when I say it's emergent, right? Truth becomes something that's generative. Like, for instance, I put evolutionary biology, or the theory of evolution, right? I when we realize that when we act with this in practice, things work really well. Everything starts to make sense, and everything, you can make predictions on the basis of it, and it gets really functional, and everything is great. So therefore, we can say it's true. But once I do that, then also other truth claims can be introduced. Like, for instance, now that we have evolution, can we say that man, it shares an ancestor with, primates or something, with other primates? And we can say yes, right? But that truth claim is predicated on the first truth claim of evolutionary biology. So truths lead to more truths, right? They propagate. It's not something that is just, it's not like there's just some final picture, right? That's just static and that we're just trying to figure out. It's rather that we postulate things, those things might work, and if they work, they lead to more things that might work. And then all of a sudden you get this sort of blooming picture of the world. The other, so that might be strange for some people, to think of truth not as something inert. Another thing that might be strange for people is that truth, we can say, for instance, that the theory of relativity is true. We can say that quantum theory is true. We can also realize that these two spheres are mutually exclusive, at least in their current articulations. They're mutually exclusive. They don't work well together. So the pragmatist theory of truth lets you say, that's fine. These are both true, right? Like, within their domains, when you put them into practice, they both work. So therefore, they are both true. It doesn't make sense in a certain way. I think if you take a correspondence theory of truth, you would have to say that one or both of these are wrong. Something has to give. But if you take a pragmatist theory, we can say that these are both true because there is no final picture, right? There is no God's eye view of the world. So my position here is also what might be called an anti-realist position. I don't really like that term, right? Because it sounds solipsistic. But what I mean when I say that is that this out there transcendent, God's eye view of the world simply doesn't exist, right? So what we have are models. What we have are paradigms, and the question of what's true and what's not true is something that's imminent to the practice of using those paradigms and working with those paradigms. It's not something that, it's not this whole correspondence theory of truth thing. So, yeah, that also might be weird. Another interesting one is that the truth status of a claim is therefore not static, right? This might be a little odd also. It's not a relativistic position, but take for instance, I think we mentioned living in a matrix. What about Neo himself from the Matrix, right? Now, before he was in the Matrix, he was in our situation, where there would be no reason to posit that he lived in a Matrix. It's not until he's pulled out that it makes sense for him to postulate, I was living in a Matrix, right? Now, so does the truth does the truth status of the proposition I am living in a matrix then change from the first to the second? And I'm forced to say yes, it does. Before Neo was living in the matrix, the proposition for him, I am living in a matrix, doesn't make sense. In fact, for everyone in the matrix, it's not him, it's not him subjectively. It's the people in the matrix intersubjectively. It makes no sense for them to posit that they are living in a matrix, right? It only makes sense for the people outside to posit it, right? So the truth status of a claim is something that's not always fixed. But that's okay, right? It's okay for that to be the case. So if we take, again, like Newtonian mechanics versus theory of general relativity. Theory of general relativity upstages Newtonian mechanics. Does this mean that before the theory of relativity we would say that Newtonian mechanics is not true? Or that it somehow retroactively makes it untrue? No, not at all. It's just that Newtonian mechanics is revealed to be incomplete with the introduction of relativity. But before relativity is on the scene, it doesn't make sense to say that Newtonian mechanics is limited. So, yeah, the status of a truth claim is something that is in flux. Sort of probably always kind of in flux. And all we can really do is the best that we can do. So this is kind of my fallibilism. And on the one hand, I am a fallibilist, and on the other hand, this allows me to be absolutely certain insofar as that can possibly make sense about all sorts of claims. So I am absolutely certain that 2 + 2 = 4, right? Because when I put it into practice, it works. But at the same time, the model that I'm putting into practice, there is no final model, right? There is no such thing as an end of inquiry or an end of discourse where we finally figured everything out perfectly and everything sort of finds its right place. That simply doesn't exist. So I can be absolutely certain and be a fallibilist at the same time without contradiction. So yeah, that might have been a little rambly, but this is how I get around a lot of the problems involving the correspondence and the coherence theory of truth. And I think it works really well, and I would love to hear comments and video responses telling me all of the reasons why I'm wrong. And have a good night.